Perfect.
Oh, great.
Well, welcome, and first of all, thank you to the Techsperts, because now so many people are sitting up front, right? It's like in classrooms, everyone's afraid of that first row, right? I had the pleasure of presenting on what our school is doing with applied learning already, so I'm not going to speak very much, which is unusual for me. But as the moderator, I'd like each of our panelists to introduce themselves and then to briefly explain a nuance about what I call applied learning, but near synonyms could be authentic learning or learning by doing. And then it'll be an interaction between us, or really them, I should say, and the audience, because I think that's what you want, some Q&A. And then we'll wrap it up with a question about 20 years from now. So if you want to know what the future is going to hold, just stand by. So if we may, let's introduce ourselves.
My name is Thomas Steele-Maley. I am the Director of Foresight Research and Design for GEMS Education globally. I work out of Dubai and our London office.
That's great. That's a great introduction.
My name is Noan Fesnoux. I work for Green School in Bali, Indonesia.
My name is John Goh. I'm the principal of Merrylands back in Sydney.
And Paul Herring, thought leader in IT at St. Peter's Lutheran College in Indonesia, where I'd spend most of my time teaching IT, programming, information systems, and so on.
Now the challenge to describe what I call applied learning, maybe authentic learning, would be in a sentence or two in your school, so that the audience has a better understanding and appreciation of just what differentiates it from the more traditional form of teaching.
So, applied learning, again, I think there are so many different definitions, obviously, and you'll hear many different terminology for what could be considered active learning. And the differentiation that we come back to over and over again in our schools is how are students able to actually manifest with experience and in real life the learning that may be happening in the classroom. And so that can happen in the classroom, but more often than not, where we're seeing our schools go is that that's actually happening in the community. It's happening in different experiential contexts, and then they're fusing that experiential context with scholastic endeavor. And so that fusing of the experience and scholastic are the way that we look at that.
So in our school, we use applied learning all over the place, but I think two examples really highlight it. One is we change our timetables so that students can jump into projects for a more immersive experience. 6 weeks of straight-up projects. And another is we have projects that we extend across the whole school. And so we take on a year-long project that is integrated into classes. Since they're real applied projects, you're sure that the kids are getting an authentic experience.
At Merrylands, we've actually changed and transformed our schools, so we have flexible school hours rather than traditional hours. People work in teams. We replicate a work environment, so we don't have bells, or our children can eat whenever they're hungry, so there's no problems with that. And we make learning authentic, real, meaningful. We connect up to industry. And just to give you one quick example, our children want to explore what it's like to work in an art gallery. And so we teamed up with a major art gallery. Our children applied for jobs. They went for interviews. They worked in an art gallery for 4 days. They redesigned their website. And by the way, this is 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids doing this. So the children have got quite a number of skills. So that's just a quick example.
And unlike Noan talked about, using projects across the whole range of things, my focus has been really on real-world projects. And so I use the term authentic learning, which came from America, I think, but whether it's authentic learning or applied learning or learn by doing, which was a term I used 20 years ago, I think it's all real-world project-based learning. But in our case, I've specialised in IT. So in looking at any situation in the community, in the world around the students, where we can apply computer-based solutions to that situation, to be able to see the situation, recognise that it's not as efficient or effective as it could be, and then looking for some computer-based method of doing that. So I've been doing that since I started a special course in doing that back in '94, where my students where I would tender for real jobs and the students would do the job and get paid for the job, which was a challenge legally, but we managed to pull it off.
Thank you. So now you have an idea of how applied learning, learning by doing, authentic learning occurs in various schools, so they have different flavors. Now is a great time if you have any questions concerning this approach to education. Now is the time to raise your hand. Oh, we have some. Do we have a microphone? Okay.
I'm in a New South Wales public school.
If you would be so kind as to repeat the question, I'm not sure everyone heard that.
So the question is, how did I transform and impact on government policy given the fact that I work in a system of 2,000 schools? And that is that you build a better product. You build a better product of what schools look like, and so when people come look and see what you're doing, they're really amazed at the transformation that takes place. So let me give you an example of school hours. Many of our community want to change our school hours because student engagement's very low after lunch and pretty much for many schools. So we went through a design process, we talked to parents, we surveyed parents, and we made that change. 72% of our parents want to make that change. So that's a good example. No government's going to change that when it's coming and driven from the ground up. So there's a lot of practices that happen that can be driven up and change government policy.
And I think it's a good point for most everyone here, except for possibly if there are independent school educators from the United States, which is where I started in our schools, of course, don't need to do much more than make sure our kids test well in SATs, right? Very free and open. But almost every country in the world has to do these things through the strictures of the government and the government standards. And so it's an excellent point that without the catalyst projects, teacher projects that are meeting both of those rigorous standards that the government may want now, but more importantly, pointing out to them that most every country has a future-focused vision that they want their students to be a part of, and so the narrative and the discourses there can be very, very strong as well. So, but it takes actual evidence to be able to do it.
I'm curious, by show of hands, who here in the audience actually is participating in a public school? Public. My math brain says, I'm sorry, used to, right? Okay, so it's interesting that so many are international, right? Other questions, please. We have a hand.
This is an awkward question, but when you ask students to participate in the real world, when you ask them to participate in real life and experiential learning and so on, are students who are marginalized or socially disempowered, are you asking them to take on additional risk? So I'm thinking about women, and girls, I'm thinking about religious minorities, ethnic minorities. Are you actually encouraging some form of risk? Thank you.
So do you mind if I?
Please.
So good to see you, Brian Alexander. Never actually met you in person. It's great to have you asking a question here. So I think there's a lot to that question, including the westernized school systems that are imposed on, whether it's developing countries or marginalized societies. And so it's very true that the metrics with which we need to, elevate the basic literacy or beyond of different countries, to just come into those countries and say, you should do interdisciplinary project-based learning and field studies, and it's going to, replace what you're doing now without the actual institutional understanding or build-up, or again, a lot of talent that allows for all those essential core skills to be built in those communities is a big risk. But I would also argue that in the future of education and development in those areas, and again, I'm speaking to someone who knows better than probably any of us at the conference, I think it's imperative to look at the cultural relevance on the ground and how we're developing education around these communities to take a focus on the indigenous way of learning as well as the Western way of learning.
Please.
So they are definitely taking on more risks if it's a real world project. And to me, that is also a good thing, because life isn't about leading a risk-free life, and we want our students to be exposed to these risks. And because they have the chance to do this in a safer context with a mentor, it actually provides a real great learning experience in that sense.
First of all, regarding the girls, Brian, I think you asked on that. Research has shown that STEM-based work, and particularly real-world project work, helps improve their attitude to the subject and their confidence and identity. So there's definitely an improvement there. But in terms of risk, if no one's checked out Reshma Sajani's TED Talk, I highly recommend that you check out her approach. And it's really an approach of helping girls to be brave, not perfect. And a really interesting take. In terms of the schools that I've been doing this, mostly independent schools, so we don't necessarily see that many from disadvantaged backgrounds, but at my previous school, we had students from PNG on what was called the ADAB program. So some of them come from the highlands and from the villages in the middle of nowhere, and were able to participate in the program that I ran, and then go back with those skills, and it seemed very successful, and went on to be such as the Chief Financial Officer for a major company in PNG. So they've done very well out of that. So I think the risk is there, but has been worthwhile.
Well, currently I work in a school with 45 different languages, and many of our children from low socio-economic backgrounds and very diverse community, including refugees. What we actually do is actually give them a curriculum that re-advantages the disadvantage, but moves kids beyond that. Because I think in education we've had years and years of trying to chase our tails and trying to catch up to the norm through a traditional curriculum, and it doesn't quite work, because as the gap gets closer, it seems to get wider. If you understand what I mean by that, it just means that what we do doesn't seem to ever close the gap, no matter how much money you put in or whatever. It just seems that kids continue to be disadvantaged. So it means that we have to make adaptations to our curriculum and what we actually do.
Thank you for that challenging and really necessary question, right? Especially in the multicultural environment that probably all of us, or nearly all of us, operate within. Please, other questions. These are great. Here we go. She's our pinch hitter over here. She's awesome.
Okay, so our school has a high Korean and Vietnamese and Japanese parent population, and it feels like they're very focused on marks. So how do you make the argument back to them about experiential or applied learning in relation to marks for the IB diploma or the IGCSE and getting into, their university choice like Harvard or something like that?
Who would like to lead that one off?
You're
our number one hitter, so go ahead, go for it.
To answer that again, I think that you've asked multiple different questions, and if you really dig into the admissions at places like Harvard and Yale and Stanford, you'll notice that they're changing radically, and probably not fast enough. But just having marks, everybody's got a 4.0, everybody's got some sort of service that they've manufactured up, and that's becoming less and less interesting, to the tougher candidates. So, but that's one end of the question. The other is really something that we need to take seriously, and that's that the A-levels and IB and AP and all these systems aren't going to go away overnight. And so the way that we deliver those systems, the standards that you actually have to meet for those systems do not have to happen in the same way that they're happening in a traditional school. So multiple pathways that kids can actually meet those standards and make the marks necessary. If all a parent wants is a mark, and I understand that's a loaded question, but you can give that to a student, and they can do whatever they need to do to get the actual standards met in very radical and different ways, with different pathways, very personalized pathways, or even competency-based pathways. And so those pathways can start to be more experiential. And so I'm just getting to the fact that it doesn't always have to be, sort of because collaboration, sorry to keep going, and applied learning can be really bad. You can walk into classrooms that are being collaborative or discussion-based for that reason, and it's embarrassment, right? There's actually, the kids are saying nothing, the teacher may be very excited that they're all talking with each other, and that's important, but it's just air, right? And so we're talking about something that is deeper, and that takes time for parents to see. But when they see the outcomes, they've not only met their trajectories, but also acquired those skills that will take them somewhere else.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think the outcomes is a very significant thing that I don't think people realise, that authentic learning or applied learning, whatever we want to call it, this approach of involving the real world is such a paradigm shift in education that may have been around for a while, but it's only now there's enough research perhaps out to support it, and to start with how motivating and engaging it is. Dan Pink is famous for a TED talk from I think 2009, where he talked about the three most important factors in motivation were autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And applied learning or authentic learning gives all of those things. And one of the powerful factors it gives that is not well recognised until you experience it is the audience outside the classroom. And that's something that I've certainly discovered in doing a lot of it, that when students have an audience that's outside of the classroom, it can, and particularly outside the school especially, but at least outside the classroom, their specific classroom, that is so powerful a motivating factor in them putting the time and effort and being engaged in it.
Look, one of the things about assessment is, you tend to have a standardised test at certain points, but in New South Wales, in fact, right now there's a live conference going on, I've been following it today, that we're looking at adaptive assessments, and that is that we need to get the information a lot quicker, a lot faster, and reuse that information rather than waiting for 6 months, a year down the track where, you get the information, you can't do too much with it. So that's one thing about assessment. The second is that, as mentioned, there are multiple pathways now into universities in New South Wales. And so it's not based necessarily on your end of year HSC, which is the equivalent of, the major exams when students finish school. They can actually get into university before they even do the HSC because of the different types of pathways. And the third thing is that when I go out and talk to people in industry, they're starting to change their work practices, and quite substantially. So PricewaterhouseCoopers in Australia are no longer, for example, taking students straight out or taking graduates out of university into their company. They're taking them straight out of school and looking at what they've done at school. In other words, they're looking at their portfolio of learning experience, their applied learning, and that's what's going to get them into Pricewaterhouse, not the graduate certificate or diploma or degree that says I've done a course.
Yes, sorry, can I just add to that this is a very significant change. We saw it in the UK, if you're familiar with their apprenticeship degrees. So it's been going on for a while. It's really going back to the future because it happened 30, 40 years ago, this idea that you would go and work for a company and they would send you off to university. And so we see it with things like Adobe certifications in school, that people are gaining those competencies. So I believe we'll see an increasing push towards what's called micro-credentialing, and that there's a significant change that the degree in many ways will lessen in priority, and will move towards micro-credentialing, which is something that in Australia, the Australian Computer Society is heavily pushing. We have Alan Radford, who was the CEO of Deakin Digital, who did exactly that with their master's programs, now working as Director of Education for ACS and very much pushing that whole thing. So it's exactly as John said. I think that will change it quite significantly too.
So I'm just thinking there's another part of the education that may be missing. It sounds like the parents here are demanding that marks are the most important thing. And what we've been doing a lot of is educating our parents as well. So we come with a very conviction that students are much more than just a grade. And because of that, the parents look to us as thought leaders. And we start shifting the culture of our parents rather than deferring to them for what the standard should be that we follow.
Oh, another question.
Hi guys, thanks for that. Derek Bartel. Sorry, I came in a little bit late, so I've caught the last section, so you may have answered this. I just wanted to ask, how do you manage and support staff when looking at and working with experiential learning? I mean, just recently in High-Tech High, when I spoke closely with a lot of the teachers there, they can tell you it's huge amounts of work, but they can follow that up and say it is really worth it and they would never do anything different. However, when saying it's huge amounts of work, there's lots of conditions for success and structure for there. And one thing that's negative, that's probably, wouldn't be much of a negative, they find themselves competing each year to come up with a bigger and better project or experiential learning.
So I would say just, bookending that last part, that wouldn't be a problem for me in the schools that I oversee. It's like, that's just fine. So keep going bigger and better. That would be great. But, back to teachers in training, we have a school that opened in Chicago. It's a field school, so the students use the city of Chicago as a landscape of learning. And the first thing we did was take an enormous resource to upskill our teachers in the actual experiential practices that they would have with their students. We shifted timetables to allow them to do pre-tripping, for instance. So there's a minimum of 3 hours per week per classroom that they're expected to be in the field. Most of them do much more than that. So they're walking out of a beautiful school and into the city, and their classes are happening in an interdisciplinary way in the city. The teachers, we've gotten tons of different professional development to them, but it's all active, and it's all including them in the exact same praxis or practice plus theory that we want them to actually undertake with their kids. And then we keep that participatory professional learning going. And so the culture of the school, if this is an add-on, if this is just a project, let's say, you can still do it that way, but it's a lot harder, right? Because the way that you think of time, the way that you shift time is always going to be an issue. But, if it's experiential and teachers are buying into it and you're hiring on that exact aptitude, I think it builds very quick.
So one of the things that I feel we have done to really simplify the teacher's job is create a database of the humans who they could contact to help them out. So we poll our parents, our community, and we know where the expertise is. So the teacher doesn't have to knowledge up on everything that the students are interested in. And we can pull these people in. And we've actually found that most people are incredibly excited about being involved in these and love the experience. And it's, on the whole, a really positive thing.
Yeah, we train our teachers in project-based learning and design thinking skills, and we run our teachers through that. And we have what we call instructional leaders in our school, and instructional leaders, including myself, changes our roles, and that is that we go and work with the teachers. So for example, I might be a principal, but I don't have an office. Today, this is in my office, 8 hours away from Sydney, and I can still work about what's happening in my school and see the projects there. But just one final point, and that is that when parents actually see the work that the teachers put in, and there's this self-efficacy about I'm making a real difference, and that drives the teachers. When they can see the outcomes and the students and the achievements through their various projects they put in, that's what drives them. It's a moral imperative that we keep on improving our students. It's not about pay or anything else, even though that's good. It's that moral imperative.
And I think that the two main questions there, Derek, the first one, I think one little way at least is I see companies, and speaking to Oracle today, very keen to be involved philanthropically in helping teachers in schools, and Amazon's another one we've spoken to, Amazon Web Services, to help us with the training necessary, at least in the IT field. In terms of the second question, my answer is to put that on the students. So at least in IT, I'm trying to help the students learn to see the problems to solve in the world, that's part of the challenge, that they are the ones that come up with the projects, because we're at least focused on, what is happening in your world that's not efficient or effective, that you might be able to come up with a computer solution to it. So really the onus is on the student, and it is a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. It's therefore part of their learning environment.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I think we have time for one more question. I just have to say this. I think parents are some of the greatest change agents we have. No one's asked us, why do you teach aeronautical engineering? Everyone said, that's great. I want my child to be in that program. So yeah, your parents are really your best allies. One more question? Hi, Mario.
I've been based in Dubai for about a year before, back in 2002, Thomas. This is my observation in Singapore and many parts of the world. There's always, I was speaking with Chris a while ago, we had lunch, and we spoke on the issue of them and me. And this is my observation among lecturers, professors, and teachers from both the Asian side of things and the expat side of things. You go to Orchard Road in the city, you will see more expats on one side, and you see the Asians on the other side. You hardly see the inclusion between the Asians and the Caucasians together. There's a them and a me. So I'm seeing all of your names right here from Australia, from America, from Dubai, from Indonesia. There are so many things that I'd like to know. How do you then inculcate and include in your schools and your systems, especially Thomas, you're in Dubai, knowing that there's a big issue of indifference and xenophobia in many places. Even in Singapore, we still have a lot of people who believe that Muslim is a race, and in the West as well. And the them and me, and I've seen this, I've experienced this myself when I see Caucasians and Asian students try to differentiate themselves. What do we do then to be able to really put that in the real life? These people are going to be working together. There'll be an Asian, a Chinese, a Japanese, a Korean. In my classes, I've seen Indian, Filipinos, Thai Americans, American Indians, among other things. But it seems like my feeling, and this is my just observation, it seems like the schools are not doing much when it comes to really including everybody. And you can see this even from professors, that we are from this side and you are from that side. What do you guys do then in your schools? I'd like to hear.
I really appreciate, we all appreciate really that challenging question, because especially in such a multicultural environment, as we see in East Asia and Southeast Asia, that really does need to be asked.
So, you may know a little bit about our organization, and I mean, it's a the question that you ask in general, I think, is a global question, and it gets back to Brian's question to a degree as well, is that there is a massive global social stratification. And so there have been a couple presentations that are hinting at credentialing into certification on the blockchain, for instance. And there are people that are working right now to figure out ways that you could be certified, and that certification means the same globally, no matter where you are. So you're competing, in a different way. But schooling itself, I'm just going to take this quick one, and then I'll answer one way of hopefully getting there. Schooling itself, and I don't mean to offend anyone in the room, right, is a social stratification tool. Right, and the way that we actually construct schools across the world is very clearly that way. So being solved overnight, even with multi-sited, multicultural projects, and is still difficult, right? The empathy-sympathy divide, for instance, within the massive service learning complex of Western education is a difficult nut to crack. And so for me, when we look at the schools that we run, we have schools, as you know, that are Indian curriculum schools, British curriculum schools, IB schools, American schools, combination schools. And what we have as a company pushed throughout all those schools is that the point of transformation that you must address is essential no matter where you are or what you're doing. So applied learning in our Indian schools is almost more important to us than applied learning in our American schools in many ways, because we know the entire subcontinent, if you're talking about the IT sector, is going to be usurped by AI in the very, very near future. And so when you think about the actual human skills that have to be, not imparted, but you have to cultivate in students, it's none more important than there. And so we have schools like Modern Academy in Dubai, and it is pushing every single boundary you can imagine in the Indian curriculum and pulling parents around with them. And so within those communities, the same conversations are happening regardless of resource. And I know that's not a full answer, but...
In fact, in such a brief time, there cannot be the possibility of a full answer. But one, our time is up, and I wanted to say Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being up here and answering these questions. My job was incredibly easy, and I do appreciate that. And thank you so much for the great questions. These gentlemen are going to be around clearly, you know, for today and tomorrow, and they'd love for you to dig deeper and ask questions so that this idea of learning that doesn't exist behind the four walls, but gets out in the community, is authentic, teaches skills that are transferable between occupations, becomes propagated. So again, thank you panelists and thank you audience for a great time.